Welcome to Prism of Value, and today my special guest is Lidia Soto-Harmon, who is the CEO of the Girl Scouts Nation's Capital, and is just an extraordinary leader. And as we've been doing in this podcast series, we've been talking about how people have navigated through the pandemic and what they've learned from it from a leadership perspective and how it's changed their organizations. And so I'm delighted that Lidia is here today, and I wanted to begin our conversation I know you're in charge of the largest Girl Scout council in the country, and so can you just tell us a little bit about Girl Scouts Nation's Capital and just briefly some of the things that you do?
Sure. First of all, Liz, I want to say thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor and pleasure to be with you today, and I can't wait to talk more about how this pandemic has changed things. So Girl Scouts have been around for, goodness, we're going at 110 years. We started in 1912. There are Girl Scout councils throughout the nation. And as you said, Nation's Capital is the largest one. We serve almost 46,000 members. 45,000 girls participate in Girl Scouting every year. This pandemic has really been an important way for us to refocus on what is really important for our girls.
Yeah. And I think for everyone, well, one of the things I has been involved in the Women's Leadership Advisory group. I'm probably not saying it the right way. I never remember exactly.
It's called WAB, Women's Advisory
Camp, right? And one of the things that we do is we do Camp CEO, and I had the opportunity to do that in 2019 in person, and we were
last year we did it.
Right, we were at Girl Scout camp, and we learned how to make fires out of and we learned all kinds of skills, and really got a chance, most importantly, to connect with these incredible young women who are our future leaders. And obviously during the pandemic, we weren't able to do that, but you had Camp CEO anyway. Tell us about how you put that together and how you made it meaningful, both to those of us who were the mentors as well as the girls.
Yeah. So that, I think, is one of the biggest sort of learnings from this pandemic, is that we had to really pivot. When March of 2020 happened and we had stay-at-home orders and everybody went home, it wasn't like the work went home. The work needed to continue. So we really need to reimagine. And I think, when I think of how tired nonprofit CEOs and basically all CEOs are a year later, it has to do with this thing about having to reimagine how you're still going to get that personal touch, that connection, which is so important in a virtual environment. And so Camp CEO was an example of trying to, learn how to do breakout rooms, try to send it wasn't really a box, but some things at home that you could do that could connect you with other people. Because if we lost that opportunity, I really believe strongly that organizations that really sort of closed shop and said, well, we can't do it in person and we are an in-person organization, we're just going to wait until this passes. The reality was that I think people thought it was going to be 2 months or maybe 3 months, and then we would be back. And then when it kept extending, then it's that much harder to rev up the engines to get going. So I think for me, one of the big takeaways from this past year was, no, yes, there is a pandemic. Yes, these are difficult times, but this is probably when our leadership needs to shine for the girls, and where we need to sort of hunker down and figure out how to, maybe it won't look the same, maybe it won't feel the same, but we can't stop. We need to keep doing this because it's too important.
And so how did you make that pivot with your own team internally? And then communicating out to people what you were doing to the girls themselves?
So my training on leading through crisis is that you over communicate, that in times when there's crisis, you need to be, so we were doing for the staff, we were doing weekly meetings with the staff, the cadence of meetings, senior leadership, then the manager team, and then all staff. And we were doing that every week. And actually, I was the person in charge of putting together the PowerPoints on the things that we would be discussing to make sure that we were bringing everybody together so that they, even though we didn't actually have any news, we needed to bring them together so that they could feel that we were thinking about them and that we were reaching out to them. We also had wellness checks, to call them that. Our HR department went out and through every month would pick a certain number. We have about 110 employees, to check in individually with each of those employees to see how they were doing, how they were adjusting, issues like that. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we didn't have laptops for everybody. We had, I would say, about a third of our organization had laptops, but other people did not have work-related laptops. So that was a struggle of trying to find, and everybody needed laptops at that point. So it wasn't like you could just go to Best Buy and buy 25 laptops. You could not do that. So sort of rethinking, how do we include people who were having a little bit of a digital divide? So that was some of the ways that we really try to bring people together. Then we started doing some social hours. I remember one of the things that we did last summer is we did like you and your favorite pet. And so, people, took pictures of them with their dogs or their cats or whatever. And then people that didn't have pets put a stuffed animal or put, some of it sounds kind of silly, but at the same time, we were all, I think, really needing that personal connection to not lose focus that we're human beings, that we're all going through this. So many of, I'm sure this is not unusual for most organizations. You have children who kind of walk into the frame as you're doing your Zoom meeting, or your cat wants to walk across your keyboard. And sort of, having grace with that and knowing that, everybody's trying their best and not feeling like, oh, this isn't professional. I think we had to all sort of learn to have grace.
Yeah. So, and then how did you, because the girls are in high school, they're brownies, they're varying ages, and that's really hard on them not being able to socialize. So how did you create programming? Because you couldn't meet with your troop, right? In person, or maybe some of them did if they had, pandemic pods. I don't know. But how did you? What advice did you provide, I guess, to your troop leaders to help them keep the girls engaged?
Right. So we quickly were able to use, virtual platforms to continue to host troop meetings. And we negotiated with Zoom actually to give us a reduced license cost so that all troop leaders who needed a Zoom license could do that. So a lot of troops continued to meet virtually. Teens, as you were saying, they were I think little kids were probably, they were hugely impacted, but in some ways I feel like they were a little happy because all of a sudden mom and dad, they were home and they had more attention in some ways than right. I think teenagers who their social circle is their peers, and they were really missing that. So one of the things that I did, I can't believe, when I look at the stats, I think, oh my gosh, I was a little bit crazy, and you participated. So with the Women's Advisory Board and other, amazing women leaders in our community, we started hosting, we called it conversations with virtual mentors. And so Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, through the months of April, May, and June, we did 36 sessions where we invited girls from middle school all the way through high school to come and it was a very easy format. I think that's probably why it worked, where, the woman leader would just tell a little bit about their story. I would prep them a little bit to say, please talk about your vulnerabilities and how you overcame them, because that's really what girls want to hear. And there were some really deep conversations that happened in those sessions where girls could ask questions that they were dealing with. A lot of the women were asking them how they were coping, what kinds of activities they could do to go through. A lot of girls last May and June missed their proms, missed their dances, missed their graduations, decided to not go off to college because they were going to have to do it in their bedroom for the first semester. All those things are, talk about mental health. That was very difficult for a lot of girls. And so having opportunities for them to connect, and to connect not necessarily with the girls maybe in their troop or in their community, but to connect with girls that were throughout the council, and to realize that the issues of anxiety or of ambivalence that they were feeling were not them for them alone, but the women were feeling it. Everybody was feeling. There's a certain comfort of knowing, okay, I'm not alone.
Yes.
And so I think that was one of the ways that we tried to give both troop leaders and teen girls opportunities to connect.
Yeah, and so much of what Girl Scouts does is the whole thing about girl, that what girl stands for, what the and really empowering young women and really building this community. When you think about that work during the pandemic, what are you most proud of? Is there something that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I am proud that we were able to turn all of our important in-person events into a virtual format. 3 weeks after the pandemic was probably one of the biggest events that we do, which is our annual meeting. We usually get about 800 people together at a conference center, and we have 300 delegates, and we do elections, and we do, we have a vendors fair, and it's almost like a convention, if you will. And so to have had just 3 weeks to reimagine that and to do the governance piece of it and to bring everybody together and get everybody trained, that was a huge, huge win. As you mentioned, Camp CEO, it's like, okay, we can't get together in person, but let's not stop that. Let's do that. Just this past March, the last sort of big event that we had is a thank you dinner that we do for all of our donors. And we did it virtually, and we delivered little home packages with a little bottle of champagne
Yes.
at home. We had people be part of it. So I think what I'm hearing from both girls, volunteers, and our donors is that they didn't feel like we went away. They felt like the connections and the engagement was in some ways at a higher level, because even though Zoom can be a little impersonal, it also is a little bit easier. You don't have the travel time I'm amazed at some of our meetings where we get almost like full participation, because anybody can, be in a meeting for an hour and then go and have dinner in their home at their dinner table without having to have the long commutes that we have in this area. So there are some silver linings to the way that we worked for this year. And my sort of, as I think about the future, and I think the future it's a COVID transformed world. I think it's not back to normal. It's going to be a different thing. And I think we're all kind of feeling our way as to what that looks like. How do we do it well? How do we not let go of the things that have actually improved our lives, improved our personal time? And so I think it'll be interesting to have this conversation, Liz, 2 years from now to see. Right. I'm hoping that we don't just go back to doing things the way we were doing it before COVID, because I think there are some really important lessons.
Right. Yeah. And and speaking of lessons, what have you learned or what did you wish you had known that you now know from this experience, or what do you know that you will take with you? Obviously, this sense of let's think about doing some things differently, or
right.
But I'm just curious if there are other things that, other lessons that you learned. You talked about over communicating.
Yeah, I think uncertainty is very anxiety producing. And we now have the vaccine, and we see the light at the end of the tunnel. There was a time for a long time that we really, I remember thinking, okay, so it was March. I'm like, okay, by June, we'll be back in the office. Oh, well, by September, we'll be back. Well, by December, we'll be back. And it's like, okay, we're still sort of transitioning back. So I think that uncertainty was one of the things that I learned was to give myself a little more grace in times of uncertainty. I think everybody that I know, we attack this like, 24/7. I was, I'm sure I'm not unusual. We were pulling days that were like, 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. We were just working flat out for weeks on end. And then all of a sudden realizing, okay, this is a marathon. And I am running out. Like, I do need to take a break, and I need to, which was very hard. It was very hard to take a break because it was all around you, right? So I think over communicating, giving yourself grace in times of uncertainty. But I think the other thing that I learned was that being optimistic, like, I think that, and I don't mean it just like presenting yourself that you have optimism, but
Right.
being optimistic that there were lessons, that there were things that we would do better, helped to get us through it. I think that, my friends, leaders who were really despondent and who were saying, but Lydia, we're in a pandemic, and kept going to that dark place. I think they had a harder adjustment than those who were, you know what, I'm not going to keep looking at, the death counts on the news. And I'm not going to keep, there was a time we all were just doing that, but just trying to, I don't know what to say, take a vacation from the news and
Right.
just and mindful. I think I learned a little bit more about mindfulness and the importance of sort of the discipline of keeping yourself away from dark thoughts is an important one.
Yeah. In a way, it's sort of changing your frame, or making sure that the way you're
That's a great way to
framing
put it.
what you're doing, you can go to the dark place, or you can try to move towards the light. And it sounds like
Mhm.
you were focused on moving towards the light, or staying closer to to the light. How has this changed you as a leader, or has it changed you as a leader?
Oh, it has changed me. I thought, I will say, I thought 2008, when we had the economic downturn, I thought that was, such an important lesson for me. And it was difficult to navigate through that. But hands down, this past year has been probably the biggest leadership challenge that I have, knock on wood, experienced to date. I think it's changed me. I think I will admit I was not one who thought that telework was a workable solution. We had just, so interesting, in January of that year, we had started a pilot to have 4 departments start doing telework 2 days a week. Prescient as we are, we had picked finance, HR, the cookie program, and one of our membership teams to try this. So when the pandemic hit, finance, HR, and the cookie program, which are important engines to our work, were not as impacted because they had already been, basically for 3 months, had been trying it out. But, I was a skeptic. I will honestly admit, I was like, how are we going to, I don't know. I mean, how will we know if people are working, and how do we, make our work? And I think I am absolutely now a convert that as we're looking at our reentry, we are putting together a telework policy that has 4 different options. We call it IO, in office, T1, which is you telework 1 day a week, T2, you telework 2 days a week, or T3, you telework 3 days a week. And we're putting this together because as an employer, I think the future of hiring important, quality, talented people will require us to be flexible with this. If we are not flexible, I think organizations that haven't learned that lesson and are not willing to be flexible are going to have a more difficult time hiring quality folks. I really do think.
And so it's really interesting, because I hear this a lot from folks, and I actually just had a conversation with somebody else this morning about, in the consulting world, everything is how many hours, your people are buying your hours, and so on. And so when you don't see people in the office, and you're not necessarily tracking that they're here from this time for that time, but how did you adjust sort of the way that you evaluate, that work is getting done, that your team is doing what they need to do? I mean, was that must have been a shift, I would think.
It is a shift, but the truth is that we all need to be measuring impact and measuring, work product rather than time.
Right.
Even for positions like our coordinator positions, which our coordinator positions are people that do mostly administrative work, answer telephones, do those kinds of things. Well, telework doesn't mean that you're not working. It means that that the place where you're working is different. And so as a result, we can track how many phone calls are going out. If your job is in our membership department, recruitment requires you to make a lot of telephone calls and reach out to troop leaders. And so, their supervisors can actually tell if people are doing that or not, or if you're not as responsive when somebody sends you an email, are you responding within the hour? Things like that. So I think there are ways that we can track whether people are doing, but the truth is, I really believe that for performance issues, it's almost like even more obvious than before. Like, I think at least when you had somebody in the office sitting at their desk, you could say, well, they're at their desk, so they're doing something. When people go home and telework, there has to be a way that they are showing their value, to the organization. And if they can't show their value, it comes across really clearly very quickly.
Right.
So,
yeah.
It's been interesting. And at this point, of course, it's been a year and 14 months. We have now hired people we've interviewed them virtually. We've, onboarded them virtually. We've brought them in. Of course, we're all coming into the office more and more, but those people don't remember a world where you had to come in every day, from 9 to 5. And they've been doing, and a lot of our work, of course, is on weekends and at evenings. So it just provides more of that flexibility. And I think as supervisors, we have to be more comfortable with evaluating impact.
Yeah. As you think about the reopening and the summer coming up and so on, what most excites you about that? Or what are you most looking forward to?
As you can probably, you know me well, I'm a people person. So for me, there is a loneliness that comes from working. It's been interesting. I'm sure when we are done with this interview, I will click off and my heart will be bursting with happiness because I had the opportunity to talk to you and to be part, to me, that's what excites me is people and figuring out how people tick and how we can, connect. So for me, that's what's so exciting, that we're going to be able to come back together and do some of that, because I really have missed that. So, and even now, like today, I'm in the office and I was walking around and there's been people that I haven't seen very often. So we're all like, oh my goodness, you're here today. And it's exciting to come back and to see people, I think that to me, that's going to be the silver lining, is to connect with people again in a personal way.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I went to an event. It was the first sort of event for an association that I belong to. Right. And we had a little event, and it was, I think there was such a sense of appreciating people more, like really valuing. People really wanted to engage and talk in a way. And I think that's I don't know, do you find that to me seems like a really important lesson from this, is sort of not taking those relationships for granted. Right?
But it's also, absolutely not taking them for granted. But I almost feel like being more intentional about the actual time we spend together. I think in the workplace, and I think for a lot of the meetings that we all attend, some of the things that we've been doing in person are very transactional. We could actually probably do it through a Zoom call easily. And that the reasons that we've been doing those transactional things together is because on the margins, we're getting to ask, well, how are you really doing? Or what's going on? Or, oh, I met this person that I want you to meet. Those kinds of things, those happen on the margins. And I think that the future will be, let's do the transactional things online and then when we get together, it's like, there's a book, Priya, I can't remember her last name.
Oh,
The Art
yes.
of Gathering.
Right.
Yeah. It's about like, okay, so how do we gather together for meaningful conversations and, sisterhood or, fellowship or whatever you want to call it. So that's what we're holding in the center, rather than I think the way a lot of us were doing. It's like, okay, we're having a meeting, we're doing all this, and then we linger afterwards because we want to not just talk about the transaction, but also the personal, connection piece. So I think we need to flip that. I don't know if we'll be successful. We'll see how things, but I think being more intentional of how we gather, I think is going to be hopefully
Yes.
one of the silver linings of all of this.
Yeah, well, and to your point about hopefully that it lasts, it's like when you come back from a vacation and you're so mellow and you say, yes, I'm going to make time for these things, and then you jump right back into what you were doing before. And hopefully, some of the things that you've been talking about are things that we will carry forward
Yeah.
in our work lives. So now I have to ask you probably the most important question, which is, what is your favorite cookie?
Well, we have 8 Girl Scout cookies. They're all delicious. We've just heard that there's going to be a 9th cookie next year. So I can't even tell you the name of it, but there is a 9th cookie coming on the lineup. Usually what happens in Girl Scout land is that, they take one cookie away and everybody cries about that cookie, and then a new cookie comes in. Everybody loves that new cookie. Well, they're not going to take a cookie away. They're going to add a 9th cookie. So it's wonderful. I will say the number one seller in Girl Scouts in terms of the Girl Scout cookies is the Thin Mint.
Yes.
Because it freezes beautifully and it's great with everything. Although I just heard a troop leader was telling me, because I was invited to a Zoom Daisy troop meeting on Monday, which is so adorable. All these little windows with little girls wearing their blue vests. And, I asked the girls, like, what's your superpower? And the things that one of them said, I want the superpower that I close my eyes really hard, and when I open it, I have a donut in front of me. What did you do? I'm like, wow, that's a superpower. But what one of the troop leaders was telling me that is delicious is to take the Samoa, which is the one that has caramel and coconut, put a marshmallow in the middle, and that is like a s'more, but with that cookie. And I'm like, it sounds decadent.
It does sound
delicious.
Decadent.
But, the important thing about the cookies that I just want to say, it's about what it does for girls. The fact that girls are able to do community projects with it. They're able to raise funds for their gold awards. They're able to learn leadership and entrepreneurial skills. To me, that's what really makes me so excited about what it can do for girls, because it really does. I just spent this weekend, we have 15 girls every year who are the top sellers of all the Girl Scout cookies. And we usually do something exciting with them. So I spent Saturday with them, and the moms were like, you don't understand. My child was the shyest kid on the block. And now, because she had a goal, she had a purpose, and she had something she wanted to do. I mean, she's knocking on every door and saying, Miss Knox, last year you bought 4 boxes. How about buying 6 boxes this year? And of course, Mrs. Knox is like, okay, I'll buy 6 boxes, So just interesting, it is a program because it does teach girls about the important qualities of being a leader.
Right. That's great. Well, this has been a great conversation, and thank you so much, Lidia, for your insights and your thoughts and your energy, and for all that you do with the Girl Scouts. And as someone who has had interacted, I'm looking forward to Camp CEO.
It's happening. It's going to be great. And we're going to, this year, because of everything that's happened, it's going to be a Camp CEO about self-care. Because I think one of the things that we are really seeing in our teen girls is that they need an opportunity to, they would say, chillax, but to sort of just take a beat, take a deep breath, have some grace for themselves. I think we're all in that place. And, good things will happen in the future, but we just need to take a moment and be present and recognize that we have just come through a very difficult period in our society, in our time, and that, we do need to make sure that our mental health and that we're giving ourselves that space.
Absolutely. Well, wise words from a wise leader. And thank you so much for joining me today on Prism of Value, navigating through the pandemic.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.